It is exactly 3 minutes past 3 p.m. A very good afternoon and welcome to this live talk show on just breaking down the issues around people with disabilities being engaged in political life across Uganda. And of course, it's only fair that we bring in the East Africa community. In the past, the United Nations Convention on Human Rights and, of course, rights for persons with disabilities has underscored the right for people with disabilities to engage in political life. However, across much of sub-Saharan Africa and Africa as a whole, this has been something that is yet to be achieved. To help us underscore and try to unpack this particular conversation, allow me to introduce my panelists for today as we do lead up and create a foundation for where people with disabilities will be engaging come 2021 at our momentous elections here in Uganda. To my left, I do have Mr. Stuart Tamale, who is a senior election officer at the Electoral Commission, and to my extreme left, Mr. Edson Ngrabakunzi, who is a chief executive officer at NUDIPU. Gentlemen, thanks for making time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Let me start with Edson. I think I need to first understand what NUDIPU stands for, okay. What your mandate is, obviously then segue that into the Electoral Commission and how the two of you work hand in hand.
Thank you. Good afternoon, viewers. NUDIPU is the National Union of Disabled Persons of Uganda. It was formed in 1987, almost 33 years ago, to advocate for the equalization of opportunities for persons with disabilities in Uganda. So we fight for the rights of persons with disabilities in Uganda, and that's our core mandate, to ensure that they are not left behind in any development intervention in this country.
Mr. Tamale, just after understanding what NUDIPU actually stands for, I'm very sure the two of you interact a whole lot, and your mandates kind of crisscross here and there. Give me a sense of how deep the interaction is between the Electoral Commission and NUDIPU, or does this only come around when the elections are around the corner?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say good evening to all our viewers. Good afternoon. When you talk of NUDIPU's mandate and the mandate of the Electoral Commission, the Electoral Commission is mandated to organize free and fair elections and referenda on a regular basis. Now, NUDIPU came into the talks and books of the Electoral Commission some time back because they were the founders of the rights for persons with disabilities in Uganda, electoral rights and everything. So they have been advancing the cause for representation of persons with disabilities. And when they did that, NUDIPU was entrenched in the electoral laws of Uganda. And we had to apply and to use those the NUDIPU structures in order to come up with leadership of the people with disabilities at the district, at the sub-county, at the municipality, and at parliament. It's just of recent that a new organization for persons with disabilities was put in place, and that's the National Council for Persons with Disabilities in Uganda. And then we had to shift from the use of NUDIPU structures then to the use of structures put in place by the Electoral Commission under the auspices or under the organization of the National Council for Persons with Disabilities in Uganda. And currently there is a new law that has come up. It's called the Persons with Disabilities Act of 2019. So NUDIPU's role and engagement with the Electoral Commission has been historical. It's a historical one. That's the background I have.
Of course, Edson, if we're to talk about any law that has come in place, I want to assume that NUDIPU is front and core to such a law being enforced, let alone the movement away from just a bill to it passing. I want to assume that there was a lot of interaction from an organization as historical as yours.
Yep.
Okay. Just maybe touch more on the issue around the scientific election, Edson. These are unprecedented times. It's bad enough that we've had an understanding of what elections should look like for, well, from 1986, you know, fast forward to the 90s when the first elections were organized. How tough has it been for an organization like yourself and the people that you do represent in that organization to accept and come to terms with the scientific election, or even have you? Let me start there.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. I think first and foremost for the viewers to appreciate that we have over 6 million persons with disabilities in this country. We have over 62,000 disability politicians across the board in this country, and that has not been a mean achievement as far as NODP is concerned. So to come to your question, of course, yes, there will be issues around scientific elections and persons with disabilities. One, by the nature of our disability, if you looked at a gentleman in a wheelchair or a lady in a wheelchair who needs somebody to push her to the polling station, for example, whether as a candidate or as a voter. But so we are conscious also that actually we need social distancing. So in such a circumstances, it's a tough order. It's a tall order for a person who is a candidate or he's going to vote or to be voted to be pushed by a person, a third party, so to speak, to go to the polling station and vote. And yet we are aware the standard operating procedure requires social distancing. So it has been a very difficult situation that most of our people are engulfed with. The other issue is, imagine where you are a blind person, you are either a candidate or a voter, you are going to a polling station. But you need also somebody to guide you to the polling station. But at the same time, you are supposed to have social distance. And in some cases, they give us meters apart. So you can't be meters apart away from a blind person. Then you're not guiding him. You are actually ditching him or her. So that's the graphic, you know, pictorial or picture of how persons with disabilities are fundamentally affected under the circumstances of scientific elections, but partly because, of course, the COVID epidemic. We do appreciate that. But we need, of course, at the end of the day, as NODP, we've been trying to educate, to alert the personal assistants, first of all, to 24 hours sanitize. Whereas the people here can sanitize once in a while. For us, it's a must. The wheelchair must be sanitized. The person guiding must be sanitized every other time. But of course, in the community, sometimes they forget in the villages. You know, they sometimes forget. So, but it is really very difficult for our people, and partly because of this epidemic. And I think it's important the officials in charge of elections, organizing elections, to be conscious of some of these scenarios.
It's really a very tough time because just the other day, well, at the height of the lockdown, we ran a story where a person who had an impairment was caught past curfew time, and they were bundled onto well, they were put somewhere, and it's only later on that some other people came in to make a case saying that guess what, this person cannot hear. You know, that's why even when you try to stop him, and it's quite sad. Stuart, let me bring you into this particular conversation. We're talking social distancing, and Edson has just painted quite the graphic photograph. As the Electoral Commission, how are you bracing for this? Because let's face it, they have to vote.
Yeah, true, that's good. And I want to thank my colleague here, Edison, for the good observation and those points that he has noted. It's true, maybe I can start with what you presented about a story that you ran during the curfew times when one of the PwDs was got after curfew hours. And that one rests in the hands of everybody in Uganda, and I can see it was a communication barrier because he could not hear, he could not do whatever they were talking, a language he couldn't understand. So it's now an obligation of everybody concerned to put disability into the mind. Whatever you do, you think about people with disabilities. How is it going to affect them? But when it comes to elections, someone has said that scientific elections. I want to make just a slight correction there. Scientific elections. Actually, they are scientific campaigns. Elections will be carried on as we normally do. They are the same voting procedures, everything, only that we are going to change and put there what we call a kind of social distancing by following the SOPs developed by the Ministry of Health and Parliament. We are also adding sanitizer. Now, I want to say something about these PwDs who have helpers, such as the visually impaired and the people who move in wheelchairs. It's true, it's a serious challenge because you may not observe the social distancing, but the assumption or the belief is that these are people you come with from home. They are pushing your wheelchair, and you are the same members of the same family. You live with your helper daily. If you are visually impaired, it takes you wherever you want to go. So I think it's like you moving with yourself, like you having your hand. If you having your own leg, it's like me having my my other leg, this mobility device. It's there. I keep pushing it everywhere. Wherever I go, I have to go walk with it. Similarly, when you have a helper is part of you. And when you sanitize, the helper sanitizes. There's so many times the helper sanitizes, and the many times also the PwD sanitizes. So I think we don't get strange people to come and do the assistance cut out. In a few cases, we get strange people. Like if you are somewhere, you are blocked, you are stranded, and you have no help. You may call upon somebody strange, please, that one is a challenge then. But when it comes to the daily life, and maybe when you are coming for elections, the law is also clear. It provides for the use of helpers when a PwD is coming to cast a vote or to choose leaders by vote. Now, you are saying that how has the Electoral Commission really looked at this? Because of recently we have had about 2 or 3 meetings, consultative meetings with the leadership of the PwD stakeholders. They have been with us and we have been discussing these things. What I know is that we may have much of the following than putting in some changes, because it has come, it is part of law. I think it came as a statutory instrument. The SOPs, they came as a statutory instrument, so we have to abide by that, and so that we can try our best. Meanwhile, I think discussions and the consultations should continue with other stakeholders, not only the Electoral Commission, but also Ministry of Health. We need the law enforcers. We need this kind of consultative dialogue. How are you going to treat a person who is walking, maybe past midnight? There's no motorcycle. These days, motorcycles are expected to end at 6. To stop operating at around 6 o'clock. Now, this is a person with disability. He has been dropped by a taxi, which taxi stops at 9 o'clock. And now the man is there. He cannot walk. He cannot move on his own because he has to go to the village for a distance of about 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers. And now you are saying the border borders are not moving. They are not allowed. If they are caught, then they will be punished. The border border may carry me home, but on his way back, because as he's carrying me home, say, I'm carrying a person with a disability. You see, maybe can be excused, but on his way back, because the border man has to go back. He's already past curfew time. He's operating within curfew. How is he going to be helped? The border man, the one who carried you home. So those are challenges, which I think most of our stakeholders, the people involved, everywhere, it's a collective concern, it's a collective mandate, and everybody should be attentive and should pay serious attention to the disability plight.
Maybe we could bring in, staying on the election theme, we could bring in the issue of biometrics. I think I was very excited when I heard that this particular election would involve some biometrics, some biometric devices. And without a doubt, I would argue that PwCs might be the greatest benefactors of such, because if someone is visually impaired and then you have to show them, you know how it is. You walk into the booth and there's 15 papers. One is for the president, the other is for your other people. One would argue now that this might actually help. Give me a sense of, let me start with you, Edson. I think, Stuart, you will end this particular one. What is your take on the move towards more digital, towards more technology, as opposed to the traditional, more paper-driven brick-and-mortar approach towards voting? I also I see Stuart is laughing already, because I understand we were supposed to move towards the biometrics in the other election. The president made it very clear, but procurement went south, and then we ended up having a lag. Maybe, Stuart, you're in the Electoral Commission. You'll clarify some of these comments of mine. Edson, let me start with you.
Yeah.
As Stuart gets his answer.
Yes, yeah. So I think your system also to bring in more questions around that. First and foremost, I think going digital would be fine, in our opinion. But you see, we need an inclusive technology. Technology that does not leave behind the needs and the concerns of persons with disabilities.
So what you're saying is the technology might need to have, let's say, Braille.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you have a technology that is used by any other person but not person with disabilities, then it is not inclusive to us. And what would be an inclusive technology, for example? If the technology you are bringing board is able to speak to me as a blind person, that then I'm able to know, okay, this button is speaking and is telling me this is, for example, President Yoweri Museveni, I'm going to vote against the other candidate. Or I'm going to vote Edson against the other candidate. Then that will be fine. And that's what we call inclusive technology. But you can have a technology that is there, that can be used by other people, but cannot address the concerns of persons with disabilities. A simple example is when you get these computers, I'm sure they'll use battery computers as well. So the computers should be able to speak for those who need to hear, who cannot see but can hear. So that when you manipulate the computer, it will tell me candidate so and so, candidate so and so. There you will vote squarely the person you want. But if it does not do that, then it will not be useful to us in the category of those who need it.
It's a very fascinating take. Stuart, I know you're listening very attentively, because from the numbers that we got earlier on when we were starting, 6 million people, I'm not saying all of them are visually impaired, but there's one disability and the other. And I would argue that, Stuart, this makes your job extremely hard, because the PwCs, PwDs are span different categories. And I feel you have a very tough job. It would be easier if you just had to deal with maybe one issue. Start maybe from the biometric issue. Also, you could just correct my statement earlier if it was wrong. The procurement statement.
Thank you very much, moderator. But I think what he has said is right, and it's not really something different from what he has mentioned. But I want to say, biometric, I think we have had a bit of it. We have had a bit of it in the previous elections, but they may not have been as very inclusive, like he's saying, because what we have had could not talk and cannot talk, the one we've been using to show the voter data. You put your thumbprint in, then it brings out your picture, it brings out your details. Of course, it could not talk. But when he says inclusive, it may not have been very inclusive. A blind person, you put your thumbprint there, and the details are only seen by the polling officials, but you can't know whether it's you, whose details have come. They only tell you. That means inclusive technology. That's a good one. If you are going to realize it and achieve it, and I know it may not be in this election. If it comes, we shall be happy. That inclusive technology. And now you talked about the biometric, the president talked about. I don't think we have received anything as yet, but we are also waiting. When it comes, we shall see what to do with it. We are waiting to see how soon or how practical it shall be. But I think that's very good, inclusive technology, and we are advancing. We are not lagging. We shouldn't lag behind. We should move ahead together with the entire world. That's what I have for my take.
Right. Edson, let me come back to you. How should persons with disabilities be catered for during, well, to ensure that there's full participation? You've mentioned some of the technology. I think technology is one side, but an election, a poll has so much that goes into it. I'm sure you both agree. The moment this poll ends, I think the work starts in like June next year, you know, preparing for the next poll. Give me a sense of that particular process.
So the story is like this. If you intend to involve persons with disabilities in any process, in any activity, then their participation and involvement is very key. Even when you bring this technology and they have not been involved, and you know it very well, that quite often we are forgotten, more or less, quite often so many interventions. Therefore, once you are forgotten, that means all your issues also will be forgotten. So one of the most important issues is to involve persons with disabilities in this country and their leaders in the design of some of these electoral processes, so that they're able from the very foundation to raise their concerns and the issues, and they can be planned for. And this again informs even how they're going to budget, the electoral budgets. How are they going to be inclusive to allow me as a person with disability to go with my guide or my helper, and therefore can also be supported by the electoral processes. And of course, we've been also talking about the whole area of vote and civic education, that is again is inclusive. That you are not simply talking the way I'm talking, and you don't have our colleague with sign language for people to understand what we are saying. We will be speaking to ourselves. And therefore, in any case, the person who is not hearing what the sign interpreter is saying will be at loss. So that's another issue that we need to look at. But also the whole fabric of the Electoral Commission, the electoral body itself. It should have a proper guidance and a guideline on how they want to deal with the disability issues for people who are going to become candidates or to become the voters. So there should be election guidelines on persons with disabilities.
Do you feel there's a gap there on that particular outright and concrete guideline when it comes to the PwDs?
Yes, we need it. We need a holistic guideline as far as electoral process in this country is concerned.
As it stands right now,
yes.
They have basic,
they have, they will tell us, but sometimes they have these guidelines when you come towards, you know, these other processes of elections and so on. But I think it should be a conscious process that actually we know from the very beginning that there are some citizens who happen to be persons with disabilities who have specific peculiar needs and barriers that need to be addressed in every intervention, including this one.
Right. Just before we go for a break, I want you, Stuart, to just respond to that, because there's a lot that is coming your way. Then we could just take a quick break.
Thank you very much. I think, thank you, my colleague here, Edison, is just calling me. He has talked about inclusive electoral budgets. Yeah, at least we've been able to include PwD concerns in our budgets. I know somewhere, somehow we have challenges. We may not have everything covered, but what we have done and what we have been doing is impressive, only that it may not be total, full, up to the level we wish it to be. When you talk about guidance, to have comprehensive guidelines, we have them. We have made the guidelines before and for every activity. And maybe there's something you are talking about. People should know. You should not talk to yourselves. And you talked about nothing without, for us, without us, without yes. involving us, without engaging us. But and you talked about being forgotten. I got so much touched. When you say that these people are organizing, Electoral Commission is organizing elections, and there is a likelihood they might forget us, I think the earlier the better. It's good for you to come up. Immediately, we understand we are through with the polls of 2021. Now, in the preparations for 2020, 20 what?
6.
I thought I was ready 2028. Okay. For 2026, we want A, B, C, D. We want to involve, unlike some time back, some PwD leadership turned up and said, we know things are moving on like this, but when we're on the ground, we are seeing a register is only containing people who are not having any disability at all. And it was an error that was made on the form, and not by the designers of the form, but by the PwDs and the general public. When we said if you disability, and then we put options for people to choose, we put physical, we put deaf, we put blind. And now these people were able-bodied, like my moderator here. For them, they say disability. No, I don't have a disability. But physical, yes, I'm physically fit. So they ticked the box of physical. And for us there in our form, physical meant a person with physical disability. And when it came to elections and nominations, who turned up on the register? We had a register of so many people without disabilities. And then the leadership raised the concern. They came. We had to change. We said, what is this? So the form had a problem. They misunderstood it. So when you come early, and when you really come up with your what you want, a package of what you want, so that it can be incorporated in the Electoral Commission, that's very nice, and I welcome that one. And the Electoral Commission's doors are very much open, because they say, we want you, come. And when you mention that, if you keep quiet, you forget us. But when you raise your voice, you are remembered. And good enough, I'm part of you. When I talk here, I'm talking in a double form, as a PwD and as the Electoral Commission.
Okay. Gentlemen, let me first pause the conversation as per now, and we'll take a quick break. We're going to be back with some more answers. The man with the open door policy, Stuart, he'll be delving more into some of what the future holds come at next year's poll. Right after this. It's to 4 p.m. A very good afternoon if you're just joining us. I'm Arnold Sagawa, and welcome back to this particular talk show on the inclusion of people with disabilities in our electoral process, not just next year, but this definitely has to be a going concern. Joining me for this particular conversation is to my left, Mr. Stuart Tamale, who's a senior electoral officer at the Electoral Commission, and to my extreme left, Mr. Edson Ngirabakunzi, who is the Chief Executive Officer at NUDIPU. Just before we went for a break, Stuart, you were touching on a few issues raised with the whole, I want to call it a process, because we cannot just wake up and suddenly say, we need inclusion, we need to have, it's something, actually, something that starts like at a building. Having an access, a sloping access for a wheelchair, you know, and things like that that people take for granted. But it should start down there, and then we build it up, away from just representation and seeing people with disabilities on the ballot paper. Is the Electoral Commission really involved in this process? And now I'm not asking you maybe to wear the Electoral Commission hat, but I would want you now to just appeal to some of Edison's comments before the break.
Thank you very much. Edison raised so many issues, and now you're also asking me a question, is the Electoral Commission really committed to the plight of the PwDs? True, I may say, and I have to say that it's true, as the Electoral Commission, we are seriously committed. And when you look at the current leadership of the Electoral Commission, interestingly, there is an enabling environment and a very good listenership. Just raise your voice. The Electoral Commission leadership is ready to receive that voice and in the affirmative. So they are cognizant of the plight and the issues of people with disabilities in terms of the conduct of the electoral process. And actually, the intent is that the PwDs should be fully included in the entire electoral process, right from the update and registration of voters up to the end of polls. Right now, of recent, we had a kind of nomination forms ready for presidential candidates. And then what happened, there is an office that was put in place, identified for that purpose. And all of a sudden, because it was raised, within just a few days, a ramp was in place. A permanent one was put there. just in case somebody is a person with disability is coming in a wheelchair and he wants to pick nomination forms to contest as the president of Uganda. So yeah, it is true. You can come up.
That's quite surprising that it was that fast.
A ramp had to be put in place very fast. You know that it's one of those aspects. It's one of those practices. It's one of those concerns. Actually, it is showing that the Electoral Commission it has some kind of picture or something in the mind about the disability community. You talked about guidance. We were talking about guidelines. How should we handle people with disabilities? And I think I would urge my colleague here, the Chief Executive of NODIPO, and of course the National Council for Persons with Disabilities, to come together and maybe come up with a presentation, come up with a way forward. How can you sensitize? Not something very big. You don't come with a big document. Come with the salient issues, and then you sensitize the management of the Electoral Commission so that everybody can be on board. When I talk of management, I mean the entire country. We have returning officers, we have assistant returning officers, we have other election officials up to the level of a parish. They may not be in the know. Yes, I'm there. We do the best, but there are certain things that I may not have. I may not, as a technical officer, there are certain things I may not have considered because of the work, the kind of work, you're in the pressure, the whatever. You may not. You may have. I may have omitted something. So that's why I say, if you come up with all the details, and then we can be able to share as the Electoral Commission with the leadership of the of the people with disabilities in this country. Electoral Commission is wide because we start from the parish level and we end up to the national level. So if we could share all of them uniformly, we can be able to change people's attitudes. But sometimes I think as NODIPO, you need to drive us because you started this thing. You started it, and you shouldn't get out of it.
Edson, the ball goes back to you because Stuart here is using words like sensitize. It would be very easy for me to throw all the weight on Stuart, but then again, I understand he's at the Electoral Commission in a technical capacity, and I guess now we're underlining the word sensitize, and come up with. Maybe all these presentations, like you said, that the Electoral Commission has an open door policy. Moving forward, where does this leave NODIPO going forward?
I think what is very fundamental for all of us, it is to appreciate there are issues of concern as far as the electoral process and personal disabilities are concerned in this country.
There's a gap.
There is a gap. So how we deal with it, of course, as he says, to some extent I agree with him because as stakeholders we need to come into this space. I can tell you that when this process started of representation, there was no structure available of government to ensure that persons with disabilities participate. NODIPO took up the mantle and made sure that we are represented from the village up to national parliament. And there was no, the instrument available by that time were Parliamentary Elections Act, there was also the Local Government Act, and all these have influence to ensure that, of course, we enter into these spaces, and he's right. So I think I think we need to go back to the disability movement Ruero now, because we have 60,000 disability politicians across the board that need to be empowered. But also we have over, I think, several election officials from, again, the village up to the national level. They need to understand disability issues. We did it. We can still do it. When we are doing this, we would work with partners to ensure that all the structures, the whole human resource of the Electoral Commission understands the disability issues. We got disability orientation and management. And that's why I'm saying when they could go on the form, you say physical, then for them they assume it's about being physically fit. And these guys end up filling our register and our people lost out. But that's an issue that the Electoral Commission officials, a number of them did not appreciate disability issues. I think we can, to some extent, of course, work again with the Electoral Commission on the matters of training the election officials and their staff to understand disability issues.
Edson, I'm going to pick up on one of the things that you said. If we're looking at close to 60,000 is the number that you've mentioned. 60,000 elected officials.
Disability politicians.
Yes, disability politicians.
Yes.
That is a massive number.
Yes.
And I could be attacking Stuart Steele tomorrow, but where are the 60,000 people in moving this across?
Yes.
You know, this and lifting the cross to make sure that, you know, we're represented. The register doesn't read things like physical. Where are they? Where are the 60,000 people, with the exception of Nodipu?
Yes, exactly. So these people, actually, all that we do, we have a cadre of persons with disability in this country across the board. And that's why, as Nodipu, we are at the front line of engineering process at a national level. So they are at village level, we have a person, parish we have, sub-county we have 2, district level we have 2, and we have at municipal level, division level, and we have at the level of parliament. All of these guys constitute the 62,000 disability politicians. And our major responsibility has been to ensure that, one, we are represented and therefore can speak and have a voice. And they have heard the voices at all those levels. They are fights. And don't forget that we are dealing with disability issues that for over 2,000 years ago have been swept under the carpet at various levels by the families themselves, the members of the family, but also by the communities where we stay. So it's real work. And that's why we are here again. So we are rejuvenating our groups, our leaders, to go and continue this fight. It is not yet over. It is not yet uhuru, because already what we are experiencing is that we have also the new arrivals who also need to understand the philosophy of the movement about nothing for us without us, to be represented in these spaces.
Stuart, I've seen you scribbling a whole lot. I think you could just top up on what Edson is saying.
Yeah, thank you. I was sort of like trying to analyze what he was talking. When I heard of the issue of disability again, physical disability, able-bodied people coming up because they teach disability. But I think we have tried to get a kind of medicine for that. And for this particular election, when we are kind of registering people, we said no, as Electoral Commission, we went down on to the village level. And we said, we want persons with disabilities to register themselves on the village, to form a village register for PwDs, for election of the committees and those structures that will be involved in the election of the other, the parliamentary leadership, the local government leadership, and even the administrative units. So that one we have really got a cure for it. And I know what is still missing is a kind of motivation. I don't know whether it is motivation, but when you invite people to turn up for registration, and if you come, others say, I don't want, I'm tired, I don't want, the kind of apathy which is there. Some people have been arguing that maybe we don't give them the information because the information may not be in accessible formats. But even then, where we have given information in accessible formats, still somebody refuses to turn up. I personally, I happen to come from one of the villages. Every day I commute from there to come and work. But I got PwDs on a weekend. Said, you people, what are you doing? We are carrying out registration of PwDs. Say, for me, I don't want. Let them, I'm not going to be president. I'm not going to be, for me, I'm waiting to only elect a president. I'm a registered voter. That is all. I don't want anything to do with registration for other things. No. So some of the people have what we call apathy. Some of them are not willing, and the law requires one to be willing in order to participate in elections. So if you are not willing, you say I'm not. But however much we talk, however much we sensitize, even where we have not, even where we have sensitized deeply and extensively, someone would say they are not there because they were not informed. But at least Commission has done, and we have got that medicine for fresh registration. The other issues, this has been a very serious way of mitigating those challenges so that PwDs can ably participate, fully participate in the electoral process. They have included some kind of dialogue and trainings. Dialogue with leadership, actually, sometimes you need to provoke us. You ask for audience. sometimes we ask you to come up, to come to us so that we can discuss certain issues which are hard. But I think that one has been done and still being, it's ongoing. The doors are open. It's ongoing, and I just request, urge my friend here, Mr. Edison Jirabakunzi, to ensure that he follows up and he can be able to do two things, so that he gets to know the programs and what we are doing, and he can also guide us on the way forward to handle the process in a better way for the participation of PwDs. We have had these trainings. We carry out training, and these trainings, by the way, are very serious on the ground. We train our polling officers. I know some of them may be errant, and they happen. We train them thoroughly. We don't allow people to be in queues, in lines for long hours. When you say PwD, even if the line is about a mile away, the constable, one of the officers, must have an eagle's eye to identify PwDs there, so that you draw them out of the line and then you attend to them. You give them priority. We train our officers to do that. And I know sometimes we get problems with officers when they disregard what they got from the trainings. We are saying, because the struggle is still continuing, like he has promised, the struggle is still continuing, only that they are relaxed. But I want them to add more energy so that we can move forward. I know there is a desk for you, a desk for people with disabilities, specifically for PwDs. When you come, you must get the best attention, which you may never get elsewhere. But when you come, you must make sure that that's where you can back. I've come to the Electoral Commission. I'm here. I'm saying ABCD. So please relay your information and relay all of the issues so that they can be taken to the senior managers. I know this commission is really very, very outgoing to the PwDs. They are very positive.
You make it sound like the one before was not.
It was, but this one came. I don't know why they came with that eagle's eye. They are deliberately looking at them. And they have made so many initiations. It's like, you go to the ground and you just a PwDs. That was never there. This was the first one to do that. So you can see. The previous one had what we called study trips. They said, how best can we handle? How best can we handle electoral issues, electoral concerns of PwDs? Which countries have been able to succeed? So the previous commission, we had to travel to Sierra Leone, they traveled to Kenya, they traveled to Tanzania. Other countries did not give us a positive response. They kept quiet, they didn't respond, like South Africa. We expected something from Namibia, Angola, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia. We wrote requesting for audience, requesting for a study kind of trip. They didn't respond. But others that responded, only 3 responded, and the entire commission went to those countries. But we picked some elections, and some of those elections could engage the disability community in consultative meetings, so that they can tell you the best way to go. You may think, when you see me staggering, you may think by gripping me, you are saving me. No, just wait for me to stabilize. We advise you. And if I stagger, then for you come all of a sudden to grab me. When you grab me, we both follow. But when you take some little time to let me stabilize a bit, then eventually, are you okay? Can I now come in? We can advise you always what to do. So nothing for us without us. But for the commission, I think the doors are wide open, so that we can have that. And they would think I'm there. Because I remind them, look here. These people are saying ABCD. Look here. They say, oh, nothing for us without us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Stuart. Edson, I think the final remarks to the two of you. I want to give you some 3 recommendations that I think everyone who goes on about people with disabilities, in engaging them in the electoral process, the 3 foundations that they usually point at. The triangle is physical access to polling stations. effective communication. We've touched on the issue of communication and a reasonable modification of policies, practices, and procedures. Could you just maybe address those three leading up to 2021, where you feel there's been a gap? I know we've touched much of this, but maybe the issue of access to polling stations, and I think Stuart will finish that up.
Yep. So I think you're very right, because those are the critical barriers that we quite often face as persons with disabilities in any intervention, even electoral process. So the issue of physical access, physical infrastructure and environment is very fundamental for a person to progressively enjoy his or her fundamental right, and in this case the right to vote or be voted for. So it will be very outrageous that you expect a person in a wheelchair to go to vote in the sub-county X in one of the villages which has staircases. So you will have defranchised this person. He will be completely defranchised because of the nature of the design of the buildings. And especially if it rains, God forbid, and the Tamari and the team rush into a sub-county headquarters which has those staircases. So the candidate will lose out if she was a candidate as a councillor, for example, and also she will lose out on her vote. So these are issues we are saying. There must be a deliberate conscious process where the Electoral Commission officials are retooled, because I know they have got new people. They must be retooled, and the Electoral Commission, and I talked about inclusive budgets, this sounds the Electoral Commission should not leave behind. It as a function of NODIPO. We do not conduct election of persons with disabilities. We only demand to be included in the process. So please, this is something you should budget for. Don't expect NODIPO to budget for this. We are struggling as an NGO. It's your responsibility as a government to ensure that these spaces are accessible. And we want this right, and we want to enjoy it without fear or favor. That's what it is as far as physical access. Then the other issue about communication, and incidentally, you are right, moderator, because at the end of the day, we have over 1 million deaf people in this country. Tomorrow around, we are celebrating the International Deaf Week in Masaka. You would be amazed if it was not these scientific things of people are talking about. The press would be, you would see thousands of people in this country who are deaf. And therefore, if you do not understand language and you are amidst them, it is you who will be deaf. Because for them, they will be communicating and understanding themselves. But you will not be understanding anything. And I think the vice president is going to be the guest of honor. I'm sure I will be looking at the situations and the scenarios which is presided over in this country of the deaf people, deaf community in this country. And one of the key barriers they face is, of course, communication. Whereas they can communicate among themselves in sign language, we, as ordinary citizens, we can't understand what they are saying. We are strangers. So when it comes to issues of the Electoral Commission and communicating to them in electoral matters, it's a very big issue of concern. Because the voter education, if it is not addressed to the concerns of our people, they will lose out. If you're not signing, for example, this kind of information we're talking about, they will not hear about it. So it's a big problem that we need to address. And I would want to hear more from my colleague in their study tours. What are the best practices that are coming up to ensure that electoral processes in Uganda are inclusive? Or maybe we are at a higher level than them that we need to know about it. So it's very important. Then the other point you raised was
reasonable modification.
Reasonable modification.
Policies,
so,
yes.
So reasonable modification and an adjustment, really, it's quite.
I think I should have added timely, because at times a
Yes.
bill could lag
Yes.
on the floor.
Yes.
Well, there's a lot of absenteeism,
Yep.
but a bill could lag on the floor
Yep.
for a good years.
Yeah. So we, and again, that's where we come out very strongly at NODIPO, because we want a responsive bill or act, finally, when it is passed, that addresses the concerns and needs of persons with disabilities in this country. Because we know they can't be all over the place coming to Kampala to speak for themselves. So some of these bills, it's a must that we study them. And for example, we've been very generous enough even to support some members of parliament to have position papers on some bills on what should be done, including the NSSF bill, we had provided input, the climate bill, we provided input. So disability all over the place. So we want a law that is not only elitist, originating from the top and without the views of the people. And for us, we come here to provide the views of the people from the ground who will be the beneficiary of this law. But the challenge we have that a number of these laws are paper tigers. they are not biting enough. You can step on the tiger and you still proceed. And that's a big problem that we are having. And I think when it comes to, to inclusive budgets and the budgeting, this is what really should be looked into. That these policies cannot implement themselves. They will be implemented by me and you. And therefore, two things must happen. One, there should be those resources that allow us to implement the law. But the person implementing must appreciate what disability issues are.
Stuart, you have the final word. Wow, Edson just raised the bar. You have to squeeze everything in just a few minutes. But physical access to polling stations, communication you've already touched, how outgoing the EC has been, and your final remarks.
Oh yeah, you have talked about accessibility. Actually, it is one of the major concerns of the Electoral Commission to ensure that all of voters in Uganda are able to access the polling centers and registration centers. And when he raises the issue, somehow we have challenges. It's true, some places are not accessible. I may give an example here, because when you are constructing this platform here, you didn't expect PwDs to come. But if I came with a wheelchair, I will have to abandon the wheelchair, then I will be carried up to here. So it remains a concern. Accessibility is a serious concern of the Electoral Commission, because in many areas, not very many, some areas, we don't have access to land property. The owner of the land will say, I don't want a polling station here. You go away. Go. So we normally have access to schools and government schools, moreover. When it comes to private schools, you have to seek authority from the private school. And interestingly, if the owner of the private school has got interest in the politics and is participating as a candidate, he may decide to chase you when he sees is likely to lose, or his supporter, his opponent is the one who is very popular. He may say, I don't want a polling station here. He throws you out. So you have to look for where to put the polling station in a public and a more accessible environment. However, we normally get such problems in Kampala, in urban centers, where we have to take services near to the people. But again, the environment, the terrain, in some places are terrible. You may not be able to really get the best. But the polling station we get usually is the best for us, given the circumstances, given the challenges. I remember one time I was a returning officer, registrar in Kalangala. I moved to almost each and every polling station in the islands of Kalangala. But in some islands, I failed to reach to access my polling station, yet I was the registrar. And that polling station could not be shifted from the landing site where I was, from where it was, to where we landed. Because where we landed, we didn't have people there. The polling station should be located where there are people. I failed to reach there. So accessibility is an issue of concern, because government does not own land everywhere. We have to depend. Now, for communication issues, I think we welcome. I know they are there. Accessible formats are still a problem. You talked about the lessons we learned from there. What we found out that when we went to those places, Uganda was still ahead. They were praising Uganda. And we said, what is this? Apart from the few lessons, we learned something about dialogue. And that dialogue was in Kenya. It was good in Kenya. The rest of the countries, they were praising Uganda. It was far ahead of us. Thank you very much. And I urge our viewers and listeners to follow the SOPs. The disability community, please turn up and get involved in each and every activity, electoral activity, so that we can move forward. Make sure that you get involved in other open places for elections, not only your own slots, but vie for those general slots. It's good for us, and avoid violence for God and my country.
Thank you very much. Allow me to thank the gentleman joining us today. Mr. Tamale Stewart, who is a senior election officer at the Electoral Commission. To my extreme left, Mr. Edson Ngirabakunzi, who is a chief executive officer at Nudipu. And of course, joining us on sign language, the very talented Ms. Maureen Nambalilwa, Not forgetting myself, Arnold Sagawa. That's where we leave it for this particular talk show, touching all issues, PwDs, and of course the election. From us, have a splendid afternoon, and catch us tomorrow morning.